have your notes, get out a piece of paper. You're going to have a lot of writing.
Is this our last week's
warm-ups? Yeah, turn on the tray. Let's put not here. The days are not here. 8-7. Okay, so listen up real quick. 8-7. These notes, listen up please. These notes will be tricky. This is definitely the hardest way to factor out of all the ways we're going to do. It is, guys, listen up please. It is very doable because all you're basically doing is combining what we did last week with what we did early this week. You're combining the last two lessons together, but it's going to take a while. And there's lots of room for mistakes. So what I need from you guys is as we go through these steps, I need you to pay attention and stop me if you have questions. If you are stuck on something that I did, raise your hand, interrupt me right away instead of waiting till the end because it's going to kind of make the whole thing not make sense. So the second that something doesn't make sense, you need to figure it out and you need to ask me why I did this or why I got this number before we move on. So let me know if you have questions as we go through this. Now, this is a way we're not solving. We're going to save that for next chapter. We're only factoring. So we are factoring still. So we know about factoring that I'm going to get something times something. So I'm still thinking in my head that's going to be my final answer. Something times something. And in this case, it will be a binomial times a binomial like we got on the warm-ups. Now, we only use this way when we have a trinomial. So just like we did on Tuesday, we still have three terms. But the difference is my leading coefficient is not 1. Leading coefficient not equal to 1. That is the only difference. So you're still going to see three terms, but you're not going to see a 1 in front of your x squared or your a squared. You're not going to see, you're going to see a number out in front of x squared or a squared or b squared instead of nothing. Nothing assumes it's a 1. So my a value, the way your book says it, is your a value is not equal to 1, which is the same thing. Because if you set it up as ax squared plus bx plus c, a is the number in front of x squared. That number cannot be 1. You will now have a number as a leading coefficient besides 1. That's how you tell to do this way. Still have to have three terms, but your leading coefficient is not going to be 1 like we did Tuesday, which is going to make your life a lot harder as we go through to factor this. So this is definitely the hardest way. So please stop me as I'm going through examples if I do something that doesn't make sense. Please. So step 1. Make sure the polynomial is in standard form, just like we talked about on Tuesday. So that's not any different. And I also want to factor out a GCF as possible. So step 1 is the same that we did. Make sure it's in standard form. So start with x squared, put an x, put your number, and then factor out a GCF if it's possible first, which we're not going to have a ton of GCF on the homework. I don't think there's any GCF actually. But next week we're going to be bringing in some GCF. Okay, step 2. You are going to multiply. So this is where it's a little similar. Multiply the first number by the last number. And instead of number, I might say coefficient. That might be a better word to put there. Multiply the first coefficient by the last, and that won't be coefficient. Number is fine. Technically it would be a constant. Doesn't really matter what word you use as long as you know what you're doing. I'm being picky about the wording. But you're going to take the first number and multiply by the last number. So you're going to take the first coefficient, or the number in front of x squared, and multiply by the constant, or the number at the end, the last number. Okay? So that's step 2. Step 3, find two numbers. This is like what we did Tuesday. Two numbers that multiply, add. Sorry, I have the order wrong. Two numbers that add to get the middle number, and multiply to get the number from step 2. So we're going to find two numbers that add to get the middle, which is what we did Tuesday, and and multiply to get the answer that we just got from step 2. Next step, we're going to rewrite the polynomial by replacing the middle term with the two numbers from step 3. So we're going to rewrite the polynomial, and the only thing we're going to change is the middle term. We're going to use the two numbers that we found from step 3, and we're going to rewrite it with those two numbers. I think it'll make more sense as we actually go through an example. But I want to write down the steps so you can go back and read it. And then step 5, we are going to factor by grouping, which is just like we did on the warm-ups. So there are a lot of steps with these. So as I look at an example, the next couple examples, please stop me if I do something that doesn't make sense. Please just interrupt me. That is fine. I do not care. So let's look at example 1. So example 1, what you need to look at to help you decide how to factor is you need to look at how many terms it has. So how many terms do I have here? 3. Now let's look for a GCF. Is there a GCF between 7, 29, and 4? No. And they all do not share an x. So there is no GCF that I can bring out front. So I need to look. There are 3 terms, so I have 2 ways I factor 3 terms. The easier way we did Tuesday, or the harder way we're going to do today. So as I look at this one, how do I decide whether I use the easier way or the harder way? Yeah, the easy way, I have a 1 in front of x squared, or no number there in front of x squared. Do I have a 1 in front of x squared? No, obviously not. There's a 7 there. So we're going to have to do it the harder way. So let's go through these steps. Step number 1, we already checked for a GCF. There wasn't. Is this in standard form? Yes, x squared x, the constant. It's already in standard form, so step 1 is done. Now let's do step 2, and I'm going to go ahead. Now on your homework, you don't have to number these, but I'm going to number the steps so that if you look at your notes, you can see, okay, step 2 from top that says multiply the first times the last goes with the step 2 on the example I did. So I'm going to multiply the first coefficient by the last constant, or the first number by the last number. What are those two numbers? 7 and 4. What is 7 times 4? 28. That's step 2. You're multiplying two numbers together. So step 2 is easy. If you can't multiply, use a calculator. First times the last. 7 times 4 is 28. Keep your signs. This is a positive 28. Positive 7 times positive 4, positive 28. Now step 3. I need to find two numbers that multiply to give me the number from step 2. So I need to find two numbers that multiply to give me 28 and add to give me the middle term, which is 29. Now they're both positive. This is the same sort of thought process you used Tuesday. These are both positive. If I have to multiply to get a positive and add to get a positive, I know the sign of my two numbers are going to be positive. So what are two numbers that multiply to give me 28 and add to give me 29? 28 and 1. I told you that shortcut. If you have two numbers next to each other like that, you're usually going to have a 1 for one of those numbers. So these two numbers multiply to give me 28, and they add to give me 29. Any questions so far? Step 4. We are going to rewrite the polynomial, replacing the middle term with the two numbers from step 3. So as I start rewriting this, the only one I'm going to replace is the middle term. So 7x squared stays the same. Instead of 29x, I'm going to put 28x plus 1x plus 4. You have to keep the polynomial the same. So your middle two terms add to give you 29. So all I did was instead of 29x, I rewrote it as 28x plus 1x, which is the exact same thing, just like broken up. And then the 7x squared and 4 stayed the same. Any questions on what I did there? Step 5 is where we factor. I'm going to do step 5 over here. Step 5. Let me rewrite it. Step 5, we factor by grouping, like we did on the warm-ups. Why, by looking at step 5, is factoring by grouping make sense? Or why does that make sense now? There's 4 terms. I now have 4 terms. I broke the middle term up into 2. I have 4 terms now, so I can factor by grouping. Now, it doesn't matter the order you put these two. You could have had x first and then plus 28. Stay with me, please. You could have had plus x first and then plus 28. It doesn't matter the order. You should get the same answer. So now I have 4 terms. So now let's factor by grouping. So as I look at my first 2, what is the GCF of my first 2? 7x. Like I said, this is why I said if you are still struggling with factoring by grouping, this is going to be a little harder because you literally do factoring by grouping when you go through this. So if I start with 7x squared and take out a 7x, what do I have left? X. 7x times x gives me 7x squared. 7x times what gives me 28x? 4 plus 4. Now I look at my last 2. What is the GCF of x and 4? 1. What do you say? 1, yeah. Put a 1 out front. So be careful. If it's a 1, you have to bring a 1 out front. We've done it before. I have an x plus 4 left because if I multiply anything by 1, it just gives me back the same thing. So I have an x plus 4 left. Is this factored? No, because there's a big plus in the middle. I'm adding 2 things, not multiplying 2 things. So how do I write my actual factored form? Yeah, x plus 4 times 7x plus 1. Doesn't matter the order because I'm multiplying. So this is your factored form. Now real quick, if I wanted you to check this, now you don't have to do this on the homework, but let me just show you how to check this real quick. How can I check this? Foil it out or distribute it out. So what is x times 7x? That's first. When I multiply my outside, what is x times 1? 1x or x. When I multiply my inside, 4 times 7x, 28x. And my last, 4 times 1 plus 4. Yes?
When you get the x out, like, that was by itself.
X first, x times 7x, where?
Or like step 4 or whatever.
Here?
Yeah.
Because I rewrote the middle 2 terms. Instead of 29x, I used my 2 numbers, and I wrote it as 28x plus 1x. So does that make sense? So now, as I combine it, I have 7x squared plus 29x plus 4, which was the original answer. So that is correct. You could always distribute through to check it. You don't have to on the homework, but that is always an option if you're not sure if you did it right. Any questions on this? Okay, let's go ahead and look at C real quick. Let's look at another example. So we're just going to do a couple of these because I know these have a lot of steps. Okay, so let's look at this. Let's look at C. So first thing I want to look for, step 1, is it in standard form? Standard form? Yes, x squared, x a constant. So I go from highest exponent down. Standard form, is there a GCF? No. 3, 17, 20 don't share anything besides 1. So I don't have to necessarily worry about it for this step. And they all don't share an x, so there's no GCF. So that's step 1. Step 2, as I go through, step 2, what do I do on step 2? Multiply first and last. So in this case, I'm going to be multiplying 3 times 20. And that is positive. They're both positive. Positive 3 and a positive 20 give me a positive 60. That's the second step. You guys can multiply numbers together. So you can, even if this is hard for some of you, you can at least do the first couple steps If you get stuck, that's fine, but you at least could try the first couple steps. Step 3. I need to find two numbers that multiply to give me what? Positive 60. And add to give me the middle number, so negative 17. So this is similar to what we did Tuesday, except instead of multiplying to give me the last number, I have to do 3 times 20 first. Two numbers that multiply to give me 60, add to give me negative 17. Now let's think about the signs of these numbers. If they need to multiply to give me a positive, but add to give me a negative, what are my signs going to be? Both negative. So I need to have two negative numbers, because that is the only way I can get a positive when I multiply, but a negative when I add. So let's start think. What are some things that multiply to give me 60? Okay, 5 and 12 is an option. 6 and 10. So will 6 and 10 add to give me 17? No.
Negative 20 and negative 3.
20 and 3. Will 20 and 3 give me 17? It could, but think about it. If they're both negative, will 20 and 3 add to give me negative 17 if they're both negative? No, they would add to give me negative 23. What else? Someone said it earlier. 12 and what? 5. Negative 12 and then negative 5. They're both the same sign, so you add them. So negative 12 plus a negative 5 is negative 17. So be careful. 20 and 3 seems like it might work, but they're the same sign, so you add them. Okay. So as I look at this, are you with this, Cecily?
Yeah.
I was making sure. So as you look at this, these two numbers multiply to give me a positive 60 and add to give me negative 17. So step 4. What do I do with these two numbers? Plug it in for negative 17x. So you rewrite your polynomial. The first part stays the same, 3x squared. Now it should always make sense. You can't just make up random numbers. So it should be a nice it's the exact same thing. So negative 12x minus 5x plus 20. We're just rewriting it. So the negative 12 and the negative 5, I'm just replacing negative 17. They have to be the same thing. They have to combine to give me a negative 17. Make sure you put an x with it. This is someplace else I see a mistake, is forgetting the x. Make sure you put an x because I'm replacing negative 17x. So you need a negative 12x and a negative 5x. Any questions so far? Okay, step 5. I'm going to do over here. Step 5. If I look at step 5, it's kind of easy to see how I do with step 5 because how many terms do I have now? 4. So I'm going to do factoring by grouping. So once you get to step 5, it's kind of easy to kind of know where to go from there because you see 4 terms. So you see, I have to factor by grouping. So what is the GCF of 3x squared and negative 12x? What is it? 3x. So I take out a 3x. So let's see what I have left. If I started with 3x squared and took out a 3x, I'm going to have a x minus 3x times what gives me negative 12x? Negative 4. Okay? So it's the first two terms factored. Now let's look at our last two terms. Negative 5x plus 20. Yeah, let's take out a negative 5. So if I take out a negative 5. Now if you took out a positive 5, you would notice your signs would be off. So I'm taking out negative 5. Negative 5 times what gives me negative 5x? Negative 5 times what gives me a positive 20? Negative 5 times what gives me a positive 20? Negative 4. Be careful with your signs. Check those. Now this is not factored because I have a big negative in the middle. I'm subtracting two things. So how do I write my final factored form? Goes in one and x minus 4 goes in the other one. That's your factored form. So like I said, kind of a combination of Tuesday stuff with factoring by grouping. Now, this way is easier. Did you guys do this in middle school?
No.
Okay, some teachers teach the guess and check method. If that worked for you, you can keep doing that. But it sounds like you didn't really get to this in middle school a ton. So, okay, let's look at one more. Let's go ahead and look at the one to the right. Now I rewrote it. So cross out, or you can do it on the bottom. If you don't have room to the side, you can write it down here at the bottom. It doesn't really matter where you write it. You can write it down here. We're not going to do all of these. So 2x squared plus 3x minus 5. You can just rewrite it down here. It doesn't really matter. So you have more space. So 2x squared plus 3x minus 5. Just rewrite it. Cross out one of the other ones and rewrite it wherever you have space at. I don't care. So as I look at this, I see three terms. It is a trinomial. Is it in standard form? Yeah, standard form is usually not going to be an issue. Is there a GCF? 2, 3, and 5?
No.
Nope, so there's no GCF, which is too bad, because if I could have factored out a 2, I would have got a 1 in front of x squared, which would have made my life a lot easier, but we're going to have to do this a long way. So we are going to, step 1 is done. It's in standard form. There's no GCF, so we're going to start with step 2. So step 2 says to do what?
Multiply the beginning and the end.
Yeah, first and the last. So multiply your first and your last number, which is going to be what? 2 times negative 5. Make sure you take the sign with it. Positive 2 times a negative 5 is a negative 10. That's it. At the very least, you can multiply two numbers together and you can do step 2. Even if the rest is confusing to you, you can at least get started with this. Step 3. I need to find two numbers that multiply to give me what? And add to give me positive 3, the middle number. Good. So the first couple steps that aren't a lot of work, you're just kind of pulling numbers and trying to figure it out. And then step 3 is kind of where it gets a little harder, because you have to think about two numbers that multiply to give me negative 10 and add to give me 3. Let's think about the sign of these two numbers. If they have to multiply to give me a negative, what are my signs going to be? Yeah, a positive something and a negative something. Now let's think about this. As I'm combining a positive number and a negative number, I'm really subtracting them because they're two different signs. So if you need to think about what numbers technically subtract to get me a positive 3, since they're two different signs, you can think about it that way. Now, if I want to add to get a positive number, what do I know about the positive one? The positive one should be the bigger, because I have to add to get a positive. So let's think. What are some things that multiply to give me a negative 10? 5 and negative 2. So positive 5, negative 2. They multiply to give me a negative 10. They add, which is technically subtracting, because they're two different signs, to give me a positive 3. Any questions on that? That is exactly like we did Tuesday, the same process we used Tuesday on the grid paper. Okay, so step 4, what do I do with those two numbers? Plug them in for, the 3. So I have 2x squared. If I rewrite my middle term, what will I have?
Plus 5x minus 2.
Plus 5, replacing a 3x.
So I need to put a 5x, negative 2x, and then I need a minus 5 here. Okay, step 5. What do I do with step 5? I kind of already rewrote it. Technically we're rewriting it, but I see 4 terms, so factor by grouping. Yeah, I see 2. Anytime you have 4 terms, usually you're going to use factor by grouping, at least for this class. So if I look at my first two, I have 2x squared plus 5x. GCF? 2 doesn't go into 5.
1.5.
No, we can't get just an x, yeah. 2 and 5 don't share GCF, but they do share just an x to the first. So I'm just going to bring out an x. So if I start with 2x squared and bring an x out front, I have a what left? 2x. If I started with a 5x, if I started with a 5x and took out an x, what do I have left? Plus 5. So I take out an x, I have a 2x plus 5 left. Now my last two, I have a negative 2x minus 5. So as I look at that, what can I take out? What is the GCF of a negative 2x and a negative 5? Not an x, because the 5 doesn't have an x. Negative 1. They don't technically have a GCF, but it is a 1 there. So I have to bring a negative 1 out. And I want to bring the negative because I want to make them both positive so that my parentheses are the same. So negative 1 times what gives me negative 2x? 2x, a positive 2x. So negative 1 times a positive 2x gives me a negative 2x. Negative 1 times what gives me a negative 5? Positive 5. Like we did with grouping, your parentheses have to be the same. My final answer, x minus 1 and 2x plus 5. That is your factored answer. Okay. Any questions on this? Confusing? Yes, no, doable, maybe? Lots of steps. Lots of negatives and positives. I hate when you do one little mistake at the beginning and then it screws up the whole rest of the thing. Okay.